The sky was the color of burnt orange and the air tasted like a campfire. And that was the moment Amy knew the ranch was in real danger. Smoke rolled over the hills and slipped between the barns like a living thing. The wind pushed ash across the yard and the grass crackled under every step. Amy pulled a bandana over her mouth and hurried past the corral calling for the horses. Her voice sounded small against the far roar that kept growing like a train coming from the edge of the world. Lou waved from the porch with a handful of papers and shouted that Dad wanted everyone by the truck. Ty checked the trailer latch and tried to calm a skittish gelding that pounded the ground with his front hoof. Jack moved slow but steady, loading feed buckets and water jugs like he had done this 100 times before. Though his eyes were calm, they held that old storm look that meant he felt the same fear as everyone else. Amy counted heads, 1 2 3 4. She stopped, her heart fell. There was no sign of the gray mare, the one due any day. The mare had stayed quiet all morning. Now she was gone. Amy scanned the back pasture and saw heat shimmer rising over the fence. A fresh gust bent the trees and sent a flame licking up a dry pine on the ridge. The sound sharpened, a crack, a hiss, a hungry chew that made the horses dance in their pens. "We have to move now," Lou yelled. "We will lose the road," Amy shouted back. "Not without her mare," Ty said, but his eyes told her he knew. What? Amy was thinking they could leave and hope the mare had found shade. They could save the others and come back later, if later still existed. But Amy saw a shape between the cottonwoods at the far end of the field, a small flash of gray. She pictured the foal inside that mare, alive, almost here, and a wild fear rose inside her like the fire rising on the ridge. Jack met Amy halfway across the yard. His voice was rough but gentle. "You get yourself burnt, and we all lose more than a horse, Amy." "I no," she said, "but she is alone, and she is heavy, and she cannot run, not fast." And again another gust sent sparks across the field like fireflies from a bad dream. The ash stung her eyes. Ty unhooked a lead rope and pressed it into her palm. "I am coming with you," he said. "No, you keep them loaded," she answered. "If I do not come back, you drive, and do not look behind me." Ty started to argue, then saw the set of her jaw and nodded. Jack touched the brim of his hat like a promise. "Be quick, girl," he said. Amy slipped through the gate and began to run. The ground felt warm through her boots. The air shook with heat. The gray mare lifted her head at Amy's call, ears flicking, eyes wide. Amy lifted the rope and the fire roared again from the ridge as if it had heard her too. The air burned inside Amy's lungs as she ran. The heat pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. The mare stood trembling under a low tree, her silver coat streaked with ash. Amy slowed her steps, her voice soft as she called the name she had whispered every morning since the mare came to the ranch. "Easy, girl, it's just me, you're all right." She held out her hand and took slow steps forward. The fire behind her cracked like thunder, sending sparks across the fence. The mare flinched and backed away, her nostrils wide, her eyes rolling. Amy felt panic rise in her chest. She knew the fire was spreading faster now. The dry grass hissed and popped. The sky had turned dark red and black. She wrapped the rope around her hand and kept talking low. "Come on, sweetheart, we have to go." She reached the mare's shoulder and felt her tremble like a leaf. The smell of smoke was thick enough to taste. The mare's sides heaved with the weight of her unborn foal. Amy slipped the rope over her neck and tugged gently. The horse hesitated, then took a shaky step forward. "Good girl," Amy whispered. "That's it, we're going home." She turned toward the gates, but the wind shifted, blowing a sheet of heat across the field. The flames had jumped the ditch, cutting off the straight path back to the ranch. Amy looked for another way. The lower path near the creek still had space, though smoke rolled through it like fog. She guided the mare down the slope, stumbling on rocks that burned through the thin soles of her boots. She whirled, sounded strange now. The fire had its own voice, a deep roar mixed with the whine of wind and the cracking of trees. Somewhere above them, a pine split with a sound like a gunshot and fell across the ridge. Amy ducked, pulling the mare close until the echo faded. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears and the rope shaking in her hand. She thought of Ty loading the others. She thought of Jack's voice, steady and sure, and of Lou's worried eyes. She couldn't let them lose her and the mare. Bothy reached a creek bed. It was shallow but cool against her hands. As she led the mare through, the water carried ash downstream like gray snow. Amy could see the ranch roofs through the smoke, now dim but still standing. She could hear faint voices, maybe Ty calling, maybe the engine of the truck. She urged the mare forward faster. The fire behind them hissed as it reached the water, and Amy dared to hope they were safe, but when she climbed the bank she froze. The wind had turned again, and a wall of flame was moving toward the barns, cutting her last path home. The fire sounded alive now, breathing and moving with purpose. Amy felt the ground shake beneath her boots as if the earth itself were warning her to turn back. The mare snorted, pulling at the rope, her fear bleeding into Amy's hands. For a second, the world shrank to two things: the wild drum of her heart and the crackling sea of orange closing in from both sides. Amy's mind raced. She could not go forward. She could not go back. The only chance was the dry river path that cut through the old orchard, a route she hadn't taken since she was a child. She tightened her grip on the rope and whispered to the mare, "We can do this, girl. We just have to trust each other." The mare flicked her ears, trembling, but she followed when Amy stepped into the narrow path between the burning trees. Ash fell like slow snowflakes, coating Amy's shoulders and hair. Each breath burned like swallowing smoke. She could see flashes of orange through the branches, fire jumping from limb to limb, searching for new ground to feed on. The mare stumbled, her front hoof catching a root. Amy turned fast, wrapping her arm around the horse's neck, whispering soft, steady words even as fear tried to twist her voice. "You're strong. You've got a baby waiting to see this world. You just have to keep moving." They made it past the orchard fence, the metal rails glowing red in places. Beyond it lay open pasture and, far ahead, the dim shape of the old training barn. The roof was blackened, but it hadn't caught yet. Amy aimed for it. She half ran, half stumbled, dragging the rope, feeling the heat chase her like a beast with open jaws. When she reached the barn, she pushed open the side door, coughing hard. Inside, the air was heavy but cooler. Light sliced through gaps in the walls, streaks of smoke and dust floating through the beams. She tied the mare near a post and grabbed an old blanket from a tack box, brushing ash from the horse's flank. The mare's breathing was rough, her sides heaving. Amy pressed a hand to her neck and whispered, "You're safe now. You're safe." But outside, the roar grew louder. Through a crack in the wall, Amy saw a glow brighter than before. The fire had found new fuel. It was circling the barn. She looked up at the mare, who was shifting restlessly, sensing what Amy already knew. They weren't safe yet. The barn was their shelter, but it could also become their trap. Amy's pulse raced as she realized she had one choice left: find another way out, or both she and the mare would be swallowed whole by the fire. The world outside the barn roared like a monster that would not sleep. Sparks drifted through the air, landing on the wooden walls with tiny hisses. Amy's fingers shook as she searched the shadows for something, anything, to help them escape. Her flashlight flickered weakly, barely cutting through the smoke. The mare stamped the ground, restless, her breath coming fast. Amy ran her hand along the horse's side, feeling the tremor in her muscles. "I know," she whispered. "You want out. We both do." The air grew hotter. The roof groaned, and a few glowing embers fell from above. Amy's gaze darted to the far end of the barn, where a small service door leaned half open. It led to the back fields. If the fire hadn't reached them yet, there might still be hope. She hurried over, pulling hard on the latch. It stuck. The heat had warped the metal. She yanked again, using her shoulder this time, until it finally gave way with a harsh crack. A stream of smoke rushed in, thick and blinding. She coughed hard, eyes watering, and stumbled back toward the mare. The horse tossed her head and pulled at the rope. "Easy, girl," Amy said through a dry throat. She untied the rope and looped it over her wrist, guiding the mare toward the open door. The ground trembled as another tree outside gave way and crashed to the dirt. For a moment, the sound swallowed everything. Amy froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. Then she saw a flicker of blue sky through the smoke, faint but real. That was all the hope she needed. They stepped out into a wave of heat. The grass near the barn glowed with small fires that crawled like snakes across the earth. Amy slapped at her jeans where sparks caught the fabric. The mare bolted a few steps, and Amy tightened her grip, pulling her back into line. "Stay with me," she shouted, her voice raw. The world was chaos: wind, fire, and ash. The path ahead looked like nothing more than a blur of orange and gray, but Amy remembered the old irrigation trench that ran behind the field. It was deep and lined with clay. If they could reach it, they could ride out the worst of the fire. She led the mare downhill, every step a fight against heat and fear. The smoke curled low, wrapping around them until she could barely see her own hands. The sound of the fire was deafening now, but beneath it she could still hear the soft whimper of the mare, the fragile sound of life that kept her moving. When they reached the trench, Amy slid down first, her boots sinking into cool mud. She turned and pulled the mare down after her. The horse stumbled, half fell, but landed beside her safely. Amy pressed her back to the dirt wall, breathing hard. Above them, the sky burned red. They were alive for now, but the night wasn't done with them yet. The trench was dark and close, the air thick with smoke and the taste of burnt wood. Amy pressed her hand against the mare's neck, feeling the hot slick of sweat beneath her fingers. The animal trembled, every muscle tight, but she stayed beside Amy as if she understood that stillness was the only safety left. Above them, the firestorm howled, the sound of tearing branches and cracking earth echoing through the valley. Amy tilted her head back, squinting at the sky. The smoke was so heavy it blotted out everything except a faint red shimmer. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, reminding her that time was slipping away. She thought of Ty, of Lou, of Jack's steady hands on the steering wheel as the truck drove away. Were they safe? Did they think she was gone? She pushed the thought away. She couldn't let herself believe that this would be her last day at Heartland. The mare shifted suddenly, ears pricked forward. Amy followed her gaze and froze. Through the haze, a shadow moved along the ridge, low and quick, too controlled to be part of the fire. Her chest tightened. For a breathless moment, she wondered if it was another animal fleeing the flames. Then a voice called out, muffled by distance. Amy. She almost didn't believe it. It was Ty's voice, hoarse, desperate, but real. She stood, waving her arms though she knew he could barely see her through the smoke. Here, down here, she shouted until her throat burned. The shadow on the ridge moved faster, and she saw the glint of something metallic, a flashlight beam slicing through the gray. Ty slid down the hill, coughing hard, his clothes streaked with soot. He dropped beside her, eyes wide as he saw the mare still alive. You actually found her, he said, disbelief and pride mixing in his voice. Amy managed a weak smile. Told you I would. There was no time for more. The roar above them changed pitch, a deeper thunder that made the trench walls vibrate. Ty looked up. The fire's shifting. If it drops into this gully, it'll choke us out. Amy nodded, glancing at the mare. She can't run fast, not in her state. Ty thought for a second, then pointed east. The stream runs to the canyon. Less brush there. If we follow it, we might outrun the smoke. They untied the rope, Ty taking the lead this time. The mare stumbled after them, her breathing rough but determined. The air grew darker, and the sound of fire behind them deepened into a steady, furious growl. Amy could feel the heat clawing at her back as they moved, step by step, toward the unseen safety ahead. And though her body ached, she kept whispering to the mare with every breath, not to calm the horse but to remind herself that hope still lived in her voice. The smoke thinned just enough for Amy to see the faint shimmer of water ahead, a trickling ribbon that wound through the canyon floor like a silver thread. Relief hit her in a rush so strong it made her knees weak. They had made it this far, through the worst of the fire, and now the stream was their last chance. She glanced at Ty, who was guiding the mare with a steady hand despite the soot streaking his face. His eyes met hers for a moment, and in that look, she saw everything they hadn't said: the fear, the exhaustion, and the unspoken promise to survive together. The stream wasn't deep, but the water was cold, biting against Amy's burned hands as she helped the mare step in. The horse let out a low groan, her legs trembling under her weight. She's burning up, Amy said softly, brushing a hand along the mare's damp neck. Ty knelt to check her breathing, shaking his head. She's strong, but she's close to the edge. We need to rest her before she collapses. They followed the stream until they reached a shallow bend where the canyon walls rose high on either side. The air was clearer here, cooler, and for the first time since morning Amy could hear something besides the roar of fire, the quiet rush of water, the echo of distant thunder, the soft sound of the mare breathing. They stopped, and Amy sank to her knees, too tired to speak. Ty sat beside her, his shoulders sagging. For a few long minutes, neither of them moved. Then the mare shifted and let out a soft grunt, different this time, urgent and pained. Amy's head snapped up. She saw the twitch of the horse's flank, the arch of her neck, the tremor that rippled down her body. "Ty," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's happening. She's going into labor." Ty blinked, stunned. "Here? Now?" Amy nodded, already moving to untie her jacket. "There's no choice." She held it back as long as she could. She spread the jacket on the wet sand, her hands steady now with purpose. The fear that had ruled her for hours melted away, replaced by instinct. "Get the blanket," she told Ty, "and keep her calm. Talk to her." The mare's sides heaved, and Amy crouched beside her, murmuring softly. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of breathing, the mare's, Amy's, Ty's, all sinking in rhythm. Outside, the fire still raged somewhere beyond the canyon walls, but down here, time felt suspended. Ash drifted from the sky like gray snow, landing in the water and floating away. Then in a sudden quiet moment, the first cry came not from a person, but from new life. Amy's eyes filled with tears as she watched a tiny foal struggle onto shaky legs. The mare nuzzled it weakly, her breath warm against its damp coat. Amy smiled through her tears and whispered, "You did it, girl. You both made it." Ty placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice rough but full of awe. "You saved her, Amy." She looked at him, the glow of firelight flickering faintly on their faces. "No," she said softly. "She saved herself. I just gave her the chance." Morning came slowly, pale light slipping through the smoke that still lingered above the canyon. The air smelled of damp ash and earth, but the fire's roar was gone. Amy sat by the stream, her clothes stiff with soot, watching the mare and her newborn foal rest in the shallow grass. The foal wobbled now and then, its legs still uncertain, but each step was stronger than the last. It nudged its mother, seeking warmth, and Amy smiled tiredly, her heart full and aching at once. Ty returned from scouting the ridge, his boots coated with mud. "It's over up there," he said quietly. The wind died overnight. The fires burned itself out past the hills. He sat beside her, the silence between them deep and peaceful. "Jack's probably looking for us by now," he added. And Amy could almost hear the old man's gruff voice in her mind. The mix of worry and pride that always followed her recklessness. They rested a while longer, drinking from the stream. Amy dipped her hands into the cold water and washed the soot from her face. Beneath the grime, her skin was marked with scratches and burns, but she felt alive, so deeply alive it almost hurt. The mare lifted her head, ears twitching at the sound of a distant engine. Ty stood, scanning the horizon. "That's them," he said. Minutes later, the familiar rumble of the Heartland truck echoed through the canyon. Jack and Lou climbed out, their faces a mix of disbelief and relief. Lou ran to Amy first, wrapping her arms around her sister without saying a word. Jack approached slower, his eyes fixed on the mare and foal. "You really did it," he said, shaking his head. "You brought them both back." Amy stood and brushed the dust from her jeans. "She did most of the work," she said, nodding toward the mare. Jack's weathered face softened. "Maybe so," he said, "but she had someone who refused to give up on her." They loaded the mare and foal carefully into the trailer. The fire had scarred the land, leaving blackened trees and charred fences, but as the truck rolled toward home, the smoke parted to reveal the wide open sky. It was streaked with gold and pink, a promise that even after the darkest night, light always finds its way back. Amy leaned her head against the window, watching the foal through the slats of the trailer. Its small body pressed close to its mother's side, steady and safe. Ty glanced over at her, his voice low. "You think Heartland can rise from this?" She smiled faintly. "Heartland's more than fences and barns. It's us. It's every life we fight to protect." As the ranch came into view, still standing, though scarred, Amy felt something settle inside her. The fear that had chased her through the night was gone, replaced by quiet strength. The land would heal, so would they. And somewhere deep within the ashes, life had already begun again.